and welcome to this webinar. My name is David Moore. I'm the Deputy CEO for the British Constructional Steelwork Association. This morning's webinar is on CE UKCA Marking of fabricated constructional steelwork. I've been involved with CE marking and UKCA marking for many years now. Although it's been a legal requirement for almost 20 years, I think it'll be 20 years in June this year, I still come across steel contractors and fabricators throughout the industry who don't CE mark and don't think it's a legal requirement. They say to me, well, I'm not being asked for it, David, actually by the main contractor, therefore why should I actually CE mark? It's not quite as simple as that. CE marking is a legal requirement, and for fabricated structural steelwork, which is covered by a harmonised or designated standard, CE marking is actually mandatory, and UKCA marking as well, and must actually be complied with. I'll go through the basics of CE marking and UKCA marking in this presentation and look at the actual penalties for actually getting it wrong, which can be quite severe. The presentation will last about 20, perhaps 30 minutes, after which I'm happy to answer any questions. I think there's a Q&A button, I think it's at the top of my screen. If you want to click that and actually simply type in your question, I'll answer as many questions as I can at the end of the actual presentation. So if we sort of bash on. I'm going to go through some background first to CE marking. I'll look at things like at the start of CE marking, the Construction Products Directive. Look at the key issues actually in the Construction Products Regulation. Look at the legislation covering CE marking and covering UKCA marking following the actual UK's leaving the EU. We'll look at the transitional arrangements. We'll look at the actual main players, the main actors in the actual CE marking and UKCA marking. We'll look at manufacturers, importers and distributors. Look at what their legal requirements are. Some of them, like manufacturers, do have certificates to produce so that those actually buying fabricated steelwork or buying other products can actually tell whether the manufacturer is actually properly certified for CE marking or UKCA marking. It also comes with a number of certificates, again, so that main contractors and clients can actually check whether those products are actually properly CE marked. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll look at enforcement. Who enforces it? What are the penalties for getting it wrong? And then I'll look at something called due diligence. What sort of things should the client do, should the main contractor do to check that the actual steel contractor and those providing other CE marked products are doing it correctly? And then what do you do when you actually get the CE marked and DOP on the actual site? What do you do with the actual certificates? Do you need to do something with them? We'll look at all those things towards the end of the presentation. So first of all, background. So I think some of you will be surprised to actually learn that CE marking was first introduced through a piece of European legislation called the Construction Products Directive. This was actually introduced in 1989, so CE marking has been with us for quite some time. A directive, unlike a regulation, is a voluntary piece of legislation, and not all member states actually made it mandatory in their country. The UK was one, so CE marking wasn't mandatory in the UK under the CPR. I think the European Commission sort of was a bit annoyed, if I choose my words correctly with this, and decided to actually change the directive into a regulation. And the CPD, the directive was repealed in the 30th of June 2013 and replaced with the CPR on the 1st of July 2013. So from the 1st of July 2013, the Construction Products Regulation and CE marking became mandatory for all those products covered by harmonised standard or a European technical approval. In the CPR, there are a number of key elements I think that most of us should be aware of, which are listed here. The first one is, towards the back of the actual CPR, we have something called the basic requirements for construction works. These are the high level, the building regulation type requirements that all actually construction must actually comply with. It also introduced the concept of harmonised standards, which are standards that give you the details of the factory production control systems that your products must comply with, and gives you the actual characteristics that should be declared on the CE marking or DOP. A lot of people feel that harmonised standards are all the European standards that we actually see today. That's not the case. Harmonised standards are a particular type of standard which covers CE marking and UKCA marking. And it's easy to tell whether it's harmonised or not. At the back of the actual standard, you should find an Annex ZA. Annex ZA is the link between the standard and the regulations, in this case, the CPR. Strangely enough, the Annex ZA is what we call informative, so it's not mandatory, which might seem quite strange, actually, but you can't have legal requirements in a standard at all. Hence, it's actually an informative annex rather than a normative annex, and that's the reason for that. The other things that were introduced in the CPR are the European technical assessments, where a product's not covered by a harmonised standard and a manufacturer may wish to actually put his product on the European market, if you like, unfettered, they can create something similar to a harmonised standard called a European technical assessment. We have similar things in the UK now following Brexit. Quite a mouthful is something called the assessment and verification of constancy of performance, and that's the degree of third-party involvement from the notified body. So notified bodies is something new that was also introduced in the CPR, and this is the term used for the certification bodies that carry out the third-party inspection of a company's factory production control system. And then finally, at the end there, we have two sets of documents which are needed to actually place the product on the market. One's called a declaration of performance. I'll go through that in more detail. And the other is the CE marking itself. And again, it's not just the CE. The CE marking is like a certificate. And I'll go through the elements of that further in the presentation. So looking at the basic requirements of construction works, they're listed here, 1 to 7. As I said at the start, they're fairly high-level requirements that all construction should actually meet. The first one, or the first 3 really, are the things that actually fabricated steelwork are required to meet. So the first one is mechanical resistance and stability. And here we're looking at the building not collapsing, having sufficient resistance and strength, actually not deforming so that it impinges on other buildings, having robustness is the sort of things that we might find in our building regulations today. Safety in case of fire is as it sounds. The building should stand up for a reasonable period of fire resistance. We should limit fire spread and smoke and have a safe means of access and rescue. Health, hygiene, and environment. It's simple and straightforward. We shouldn't actually be building things that actually give off toxic gases, no dangerous particles, no emissions of radiation, pollutions on water, etc. And you'll find that actually in the CE marking standard for actually fabricated steelwork, things like emissions of radioactivity are actually included. And I think in the actual harmonised standard, you can declare those should you wish. Other items include safety in use, protection against noise, energy saving and heat retention. And lastly is actually sustainability, although there's not a great deal on this in the actual CPR. Harmonised standards are also something that were introduced by the CPR. These are like normal civil standards. They're written by the Centre for European Normalisation, which is like the European BSI. And they're written on a mandate or a contract that SEN gets from the European Commission. And if you go onto the European Commission's website, you can actually search for harmonised standards, and you can find the one for fabricated steelwork, which is 1090 Part 1. And that's based on a mandate which is called Mandate M120, which actually sets out the details of the factory production control system that manufacturers must actually comply with, and actually gives the characteristics that might be declared on your CE marking in your DOP, and gives the level of third-party intervention from the notified body. There's a whole series of mandates for lots and lots of harmonised standards. I say they all come from actually the European Commission, and they all set out similar things. I say most harmonised standards, even today, are actually based upon the Construction Products Directive, although they are being updated, and together with an update on the CPR itself, there is actually a whole host of actually work going on within SEN to actually develop a new series of harmonised standards based on what's called a standardisation request rather than a mandate. These may come into force in a number of years' time. The other basic requirement is the assessment of third-party assessment, and the CPR gives these 6 levels of attestation. Starting at the bottom there, you have level 4, where you have the manufacturer's declaration, going up to actually the top one there, which is level 1+, which is product conformity, which is where the actual notified body comes into the actual factory and actually assesses the product. For constructional steelwork, the level of assessment is 2+ in red there. That means the notified body comes in and probably every year and actually assesses the process, the factory process. So they're looking at how the steel comes into the factory, how the steel's traced through the factory from actually the stockyard right through to actually going on site. They're looking at the welding and the cutting and drilling systems, and looking for actually people in charge who have the actual right knowledge to control the welding processes. All these things will be assessed as part of the actual factory production control system by the third-party body. Again, notified bodies is a new thing that was introduced in the CPR, and as I said at the start, these are bodies that carry out third-party assessment. They're notified by government, and the notified bodies are listed in a website. It's called NANDO. It's the European Commission's website. If you Google NANDO and the CPR, you can actually find a list of notified bodies there. Obviously, in the UK, we now have UKCA marking, where notified bodies are replaced by approved bodies. And again, there's actually a list of approved bodies given on a .gov website. The actual web link is given there. So if you need to find an approved body for a particular harmonised standard, such as 1090 Part 1, you can actually go onto the approved body website and actually look up then and see which approved bodies are certified for which harmonised standards. BCSA's own certification body, SCCS, is an approved body. There are other bodies such as BSI and Lloyd's, many more, some of which are actually approved for both notified bodies and approved bodies. So there's a list you can find on either NANDO or actually on the .gov website of either notified or approved bodies. So a bit more background. So the first thing that many people ask is what types of construction does the CPR apply to? And it says quite glibly, it applies to buildings and civil engineering works. And then the other thing we're asked is that what products are not covered by the CPR? And that's quite difficult to sort of find out. It doesn't cover products with no implications for health, safety, or energy efficiency. If you can identify one, please tell me. It doesn't cover those not subject to regulation, obviously. And it doesn't cover products that are supplied or placed on the market before the 1st of July 2013. This, I think, is important, given sustainability and given the actual dash for actually low emissions products. We're looking at reusing steel. So steel actually placed on the market in the 1970s is not subject to actual CE marking on the CPR because the CPR is not retrospective. There's lots of implications for that, and I'm sure I'll get questions on that later on. It's also, it doesn't apply to actually products where the harmonised standard isn't in force. And there was an issue there for the fabricated steelwork, 1090 Part 1. Although the CPR came into force on the 1st of July 2013, 1090 Part 1 didn't come into force until the 1st of July 2014. There was a year when CE marking of fabricated steelwork wasn't mandatory. So a product, a steel product placed on the market in perhaps August 2013 didn't need CE marking and could actually be reused now without CE marking. The other thing to actually try and define is what the CPR means by construction works. And it's not so clear in the CPR what it covers. There is actually a European document which gives more information. And this is what I quoted here, where it says, means everything that is constructed or results from construction operations and is fixed to the ground. Fixed to the ground can be interpreted in a number of ways. It might mean that offshore structures which are fixed to the seabed are not covered by the CPR. Also, actually in the same document, it gives far more information on what construction works are. I've listed all the buildings and construction works that are given in the actual document. That includes dwellings, obviously houses, industrial, commercial, office, health, educational, recreational and agricultural buildings, bridges, roads and highways, railways, pipe network, stadiums, swimming pools, wharfs, platforms, docks, locks, channels, dams, towers, tanks and tunnels. So it's very, very comprehensive and covers almost everything we actually do. I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes looking at the actual legislation covering both CE marking and UKCA marking. So I talked about the Construction Products Regulation. I talked about it coming into force on July 2013. This is a piece of EU legislation. And that particular piece of legislation tells you what to do. It doesn't tell you who the policemen are, and it doesn't tell you what the penalties are for getting it wrong. Each member state has its own version of the CPR to actually give that information. And in the UK, we have the Construction Products Regulations 2013, and that defines the enforcement authorities. And in this case, it's trading standards. It also lists the penalties for not complying with the CPR. So it says the policemen are, and it says what the penalties are for actually getting it wrong. We then come to Brexit. So in sort of 2019, the UK government produced 2 additional pieces of legislation covering construction products, covering CE marking, and introducing the concept of UKCA marking. So the first one was the Construction Products Amendments, EU Exit Regulations 2019. And that effectively modifies the European Union version of the CPR. So wherever you see the letter CE, they are replaced with UK. Whenever you see the word harmonised, that's replaced by designated. And whenever you see notified, that's replaced by approved. So we have UKCA marking, which are certified by approved bodies to designated standards, whereas for the European version, it would actually be CE marking, certified by notified bodies to harmonised standards. There's also a 4th piece of legislation which gives you the date which the 2019 regulations come into force, which is the 31st of December 2020, which is exit day from the European Union. I thought it was worthwhile pointing out those 4 bits of legislation. To try and summarise UKCA marking with CE marking, I provide a little table here. So on the left, we've got the UK approach. So the legislation is the Construction Products Regulations EU Exit 2019. That's the law we're actually complying with. And that requires a UK approved body for certification. That's third-party assessment. And the assessment is done against a UK designated standard. For the CE marking, the European approach, the legislation is the Construction Products Regulation. Requires an EU notified body to certify or third-party assess against the European harmonised standards. So that's basically the main differences between UKCA and CE marking. In terms of what's acceptable in terms of UKCA marking and CE marking, this table sets out what's acceptable in Great Britain and in Northern Ireland. I mean, following Brexit, effectively, the UK is split in terms of regulations into Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And the actual top part of this table tells you what's actually applicable in Great Britain. So for construction products supplied to England, Wales, and Scotland, up until the end of June 2025, UKCA marking or CE marking is acceptable. There's also another mark, which is the mark used in Northern Ireland, which is CE plus UKNI marking, which is also acceptable. Currently, government are saying that from the 1st of July 2025, CE marking will no longer be applicable in Great Britain, and only UKCA marking will be accepted. The situation is different in Northern Ireland, where we have unfettered access, where CE marking or CE plus UKNI marking will be acceptable for the foreseeable future. I thought I'd just actually list some of the harmonised standards for the constituent products we use in construction, in Steelwork construction. These are listed here. I'll split them into harmonised standards, the European standards, and the UK designated standards. So we have open sections, hollow sections, structural bolts, and fabrication. There are a lot more. This is just actually a snapshot of what's available. And I'm trying to name them so you have a distinction between harmonised and designated. So for open sections, EN, Euronorm, 1025 Part 1. The UK designated standard is British Standards, Euronorm, 1025 Part 1, and so on and so forth going down. Currently, there is no difference between harmonised and designated standards. That's not to say they won't be going forward. We may find going forward that the UK designated standards differ and diverge from European harmonised standards. We'll have to wait and see. Back in August of last year, the Department for Business and Trade actually issued an edict. It essentially announced its intention to indefinitely extend the use of CE marking beyond the deadline of December 2024. The Department for Business and Trade is only responsible for the actual standards, for the actual regulations listed in this particular slide. If you have a quick look through it, you'll find that it doesn't cover construction products. So the announcement they made on the 1st of August last year only covered those products. It did not apply to construction products. I think this announcement caused a lot of confusion in the industry. A lot of people thinking that CE marking would continue indefinitely for construction products. Construction products fall under the Department for Levelling Up and Housing Communities. And my understanding is that they will be ending CE marking for construction products at the end of June 2025. So that gives you a little update on the regulations, some of the actual differences or the main differences between CE marking and UKCA marking, some idea of when CE marking will end for construction products and when UKCA marking will actually be accepted within Great Britain. I'd also like to focus now on the main actors in the actual supply chain for actually both CE marking and UKCA marking, and there are 3 of them. There's the manufacturer, there's the distributor, and there's the importer. I've included on this slide some very simple definitions of what a manufacturer, a distributor, and importer is. So a manufacturer is someone who markets a product under his own name or trademark. A distributor is someone other than the manufacturer who makes the construction products available on the market. An importer is someone who places a construction product. And here I'm using the actual, the UK version. It's a construction from a country outside the UK on the UK market. The CPR does not tell you which companies fall into which category. And it's up to each company to identify whether they are a manufacturer, a distributor, or an importer. And in some cases, some companies can actually be more than one. You can actually be a stockholder who is actually buying steel from the steel maker and distributing it to steelwork contractors. That will be a distributor. But if that stockholder also actually did a bit of fabrication, he will become a manufacturer as well and have to comply with the actual manufacturer's legal obligations in the CPR. But it's not clear sometimes actually which category you fall into, and some companies can fall into more than one category. In terms of a manufacturer, there are some legal requirements placed on him, which are more than the other 2. For example, the manufacturer has to have in place a factory production control certificate. And for fabricated steelwork, this is assessed to level 2+, as explained previously, and must be assessed by a third party. And that third party will issue the manufacturer with an FBC certificate. If it's 21090 Part 1, the fabrication standard, he will also get a wellness certificate. And once a product is placed on the market, fabricated steelwork, the manufacturer has to produce a either CE or UKCA marking certificate, as well as a declaration of performance. I'll just briefly go through each of those. So this is a typical factory production control certificate. It's an up-to-date one, happens to be by sort of William Hale Limited. And I just want to point out a couple of things. So at the top there, it says certificate of factory production control, and it gives you some letters and numbers. The 2273 is important. That's a 4-digit code for the approved body, in this case, SCCS. But all approved bodies and notified bodies have a 4-digit code. So if you are a main contractor or a client and you're looking to actually buy construction steelwork from a fabricator, you can look up that notified body. You can look up the 2273 on the UK Gov website and check out whether indeed SCCS is an approved body for fabricated steelwork 21090 Part 1. You can do that for all the actual sort of harmonised standards, all the approved bodies. Later down the FBC certificate, you can see which products he's being assessed for. In this case, it's the UK Designated Standard 1090 Part 1, 2009, plus Amendment number 1, 2011. And it gives you some idea of the execution standard. So the level of execution or the level of quality control is actually issued as 4, and that's in accordance with the other part of 1090 Part 2, 2018. And then at the bottom there, you need to actually be aware of when the actual certificate was first issued and when it expires. In this case, the expiry date is March 2026. So currently, this particular company is actually accredited to actually do CE marking, fabricated steelwork. It also gets, for 1090 Part 1, a welding certificate, and this is a typical weld certificate. And again, if I go through some of the information, at the top there, you get the 4-digit code for the approved body, 102273, to the CPR, and it's the weld certificate WC at the end there. And you get some idea of the welding processes, the execution class, and the basic materials for which this particular organisation has been assessed for CE marking and UKCA marking. You can also see the responsible welding coordinator's name down there, and that person has been checked out by the approved body to make sure he's competent and capable for actually the welding processes for these steels. Finally, at the bottom there, we have the date of the issue of the certificate, and again, it's March 2026, so it's current. One of the main articles, one of the main parts of the actual CPR is Article 4.1. And I put here, I think, the UK version of that article, which says when a construction product is covered by a harmonised or designated standard to a European or UK technical assessment as being used for it, the manufacturer shall issue a declaration of performance when such a product is placed on the market. Now, this is clearly placing a legal requirement on the manufacturer to actually issue or draw up a declaration of performance for products once they're placed on the market. So the question is, what does a DOP actually look like? There is some information given in the harmonised standard as to what a DOP should contain, and I've mocked this up to actually give you some idea of what you might find. So at the top there, you have a unique project. It could be a project number or a contract number. It's unique to that particular product. You also have some idea of the actual product itself. In this case, it's welded steel items in accordance with component specification M346. It could be anything. Intended uses of the construction product. This is given in the harmonised standard itself, and this particular wording can be taken from there and included on the DOP. It also actually includes the name and trademark of the manufacturer and the contact details. So the person doing the manufacturing, he needs to put his name and address here and where he can be contacted. It also actually says the system of attestation of conformity. In this case, it's System 2+. As we said before, it's actually third-party assessed. It also gives the information for the notified body. So I put the Steel Construction Certification Scheme and the address there. That's also followed by the approved body's number, 2273. Again, that must be on the DOP, and that can be checked using the actual government website or NANDO if it's a CE mark. And at the bottom there, there's actually a statement from the approved body saying that this has been assessed correctly. And then at the end, we have a table of the essential characteristics. These are the characteristics that are given in the Annex ZA of BSEN 1090 Part 1. It gives a whole series of characteristics. Not all characteristics need to be defined. The actual construction products regulation states that only one needs to be defined on the DOP. So the legal requirement is to declare just one. I think in most cases, my advice to steel contractors is to declare those which are under its control. Now, some of the design information may come from a consultant, in which case it's not under the control of the steel contractor. My advice is not to declare that. If you do, you're taking on the legal responsibility of the consultant. So just declare those things that are under control of the actual fabricator. So what should a CE mark, a UKCA marking look like? There's legislation covering the actual CE mark. There's also a UK government website covering the UKCA mark. And both these pieces of legislation give you the size and the shape of either the CE or the UKCA mark. And they tell you legally to actually maintain the same proportions if it's reduced or enlarged. And in both cases, you can't have a CE mark or a UKCA mark less than 5 millimeters tall. It also tells you that when you're affixing these marks to a construction products, they must be visible and legible and indelibly fixed to the product. You can fix it to the product itself, you can fix it to the packaging or the accompanying documents. Clearly, with fabricated steelwork, it's generally fixed to the accompanying documents, so the delivery note may well contain the actual CE mark and the information. It also tells you what the CE mark should actually contain, and this applies also to UKCA marking. It should actually be the mark itself, followed by the last 2 digits in the year it was fixed, the name and address of the manufacturer, the reference back to the actual DOP, the level or class of performance, the name or number for the harmonised or designated standard, the identification number for the notified or approved body, and the attended use. So again, I've mocked one up here. This is UKCA marking. You can see the mark at the top there. You can see the actual notified body or approved body number, 2273, the manufacturer's name and address, and the 1, 3, the 13 in the centre there is the actual last 2 digits of the year the actual product was placed on the market. So that's important as well. It gives you some idea of the product and the link to the declaration of performance, the class, which I've assumed is execution class 2, the designated or harmonised standard, in this case 1090 part 1, and the intended use, which again comes from the harmonised standard itself. So you can see what each of the actual component parts of that UKCA marking mean. And as a client, as a main contractor, you can check these things out. You can check the actual 4-digit number. Is it SCCS? Is it somebody else? You can ring up job logs and say, please send me your FBC and well certificate, and you can check out whether this thing's been done correctly. Last couple of slides, we're looking at enforcement. So the Construction Products Regulations 2013 gives the actual UK legislation and the enforcement of CE marking and UKCA marking here in the UK. That came into force 1st of July 2013, and that makes the policing authority in England, Wales and Scotland local weights and measures, or the Secretary of State, so effectively trading standards, and in Northern Ireland is any district council. The penalties they can impose are quite severe. So if they find manufacturers of constructional steelwork or manufacturers of other products covered by harmonised standards, they can actually, and you're not doing it correctly, they can actually issue suspension notices for you to stop work immediately. Can be forfeiture, it can actually loss of money or property can be taken away from you until I actually put things right. Prohibition notices can be actually issued for you to stop work at once. They can issue fines, it's level 5. I think I looked at level 5 a couple of weeks ago, and it is actually unlimited, so that could be quite severe. And if they can find a controlling mind that's decided not to actually CE mark the product, then imprisonment might be the final thing, with up to 3 months in jail. So quite severe penalties. So in terms of actually main contractors and clients, what should you be doing to actually make sure that your products are properly either CE marked or UKCA marked? Well, first of all, you can try and identify the list of products and suppliers. There are a number of websites to do this. The European Commission has a website called NANDO, which you can just look up, and that will give you a list of harmonised standards covering loads of products, literally thousands of products. The designated standards are given on the UK Gov website, and again, you can see what products are covered there. Identify whether the things you're asking for are actually covered by harmonised or designated standards and whether they should be CE marked or not. If you find your product should be CE marked or UKCA marked, then my advice is to check with the manufacturer, to check the manufacturer has in place a factory production control certificate, and in the case of actually 1090 part 1, a welding certificate. And I suggest you obtain copies of these and you do your due diligence on the certificates to make sure they're actually correctly done. The other thing I would sort of ask main contractors and clients is, what do you do with the actual UKCA marking information when the product comes to site? So it might be on the delivery note, it might be on the side of the actual box or barrel, etc. What do you do with it? My question is, you need some kind of intervention on site to collect this information. You need to actually make sure the CE marking and UKCA marking is correct I've seen a number of instances where things like shear studs have been delivered to site in barrels where the information is clearly not correct and incorrect. But you need to actually check that it's correct. Once you've checked it and you're happy it's correct, then I think you need to actually take a copy of it, you need to file it. My advice will be to actually file all the information on CE marking and DOPs in the actual operational maintenance manual. Then insurance issues. I've spoken to a number of insurance groups about product liability and building insurance. What happens if you have a building where the products should have been UKCA marked and have not been? And they're quite clear. They say, as far as they're concerned, insurance is null and void. And the same thing applies to building insurance, that you may have constructed a building and the manufacturer may not have had CE marking in place correctly or UKCA marking correctly, and in which case your building may not comply with building regulations here in the UK. The client may look to recover costs and the manufacturer may well be prosecuted under the actual CPR. It's important to make sure that the correct UKCA marking or CE marking is available so that the insurance issues are correctly covered. Finally, final two slides. The Building Safety Act came to force about a year ago, and the Act itself has a section on the construction products regulation, and it creates a concept of what's called this safety critical products and gives the Secretary of State the power to make regulations to place safety critical products on a statutory list. I have been talking to actually DLUC about this, and they are thinking about making UKCA marking into a safety mark going forward. So you may find going forward that UKCA marking and the designated standards actually differ from the harmonised standards, and that the focus is on safety rather than a trademark. So there are things coming in the pipeline that may change UKCA marking and make it different from CE marking. Finally, my last slide, further information on both CE marking and UKCA marking can be found on the actual BCSA website and on the .gov website. You've got steelconstruction.org there and steelconstruction.info there. You've got information on both CE marking and UKCA marking. That's me finished. We've had a quick run through the background to CE marking, looked at the legislation, looked at the changes following Brexit and the introduction of UKCA marking, looked at the actual main players, the manufacturer, the importer and the distributor, and enforcement, how CE marking and UKCA marking is enforced, and what due diligence clients and manufacturers should undertake to make sure that CE marking is done correctly.